It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Welcome to this very special episode of the Lekker Rugby Pod, episode 86. And today we welcome Franco Smith, who's in Italy. Can you believe it? Harry's in America, and I'm, of course, stuck in South Africa. Franco's in Italy for the wedding of his older son, Franco. And before I say welcome, Franco, I'm going to pass it straight over to Harry to sing his usual praises. And this is kind of a tradition of the Lekker Rugby Pod. Over to you, Harry.
And now for something amazing. Petrus, Francois Smith, Franco, the general, the bull slayer. He's from Vrystaat, he's a cheater, but he's never a cheater. A globetrotter from Bloem to Welkom, but then he went also to Argentina, Wales, and France, back to Pretoria for 27 good appearances in the Super 12 and the Currie Cup. Won 9 Springbok caps at 10 and 12, scored 23 points, only 1 loss at Loftus Sorry. And then he went to a thousand-year-old city in Wales. And the rest of his career, he's been bouncing around from thousand-year-old cities to thousand-year-old cities, whether it's in Italy, Treviso, with a cathedral and high rainfall, and now Glasgow, high rainfall, cathedral, old city. There's something about Franco that doesn't just sit still. He's a coach. He's a coach's coach. He's secretly in love-hate with Pretoria, and he did that world-famous smile as he won the ERC final on your home ground, MVA. Welcome, Franco Smith.
Thank you very much, Harry. Thanks for the welcome.
I love it. I love it. You're the opposite of Wingard. Now, listen, obviously you did have time in different places. And the first question I have is, was that by design? Were you one of those boys that sat around looking at the globe, spinning it around and saying, I want to go to the north of Italy. I want to see the world. Or did it just happen because rugby is shaped that way?
Look, in 1994, when Neely Smith organized for myself and the Chet Mahere, a friend of mine, to come and play in Italy, I thought that was quite cool, to come and play before the first Super Rugby season started in 1995. And I was just, I came back from injury after I started. Well, as a youngster, I started playing for the Free State when I was 19 years old, and then, got an injury on my knee, and there wasn't enough game time. So he organized this trip, and I spent 8 months in Modena, also in the north of Italy, in the Emilia-Romagna region. And I fell in love with the place, and always thought I would like to finish my career, at Benetton at that stage. Was as it's now the famous one. Wayne Smith at that stage coached Benetton, and I came up for a day, and I was quite intrigued with the city. It's beautiful up here, close to Venice. So I always thought I'll finish my career there. And then when the occasion arose in 2002, I decided to come and do that. And through that experience, obviously, I felt brave enough to live outside. I thought I would have had the same experience in Wales in '99. It was different. Rodney Parade, I played for the Newport Giants back then with Gary Teichmann. We went across after we got left out of the World Cup squad in '99, the field at the Newport Stadium wasn't yet, Rodney Parade wasn't yet adapted to the style I was playing. It was the opposite of Pretoria where I played, and even in Bloemfontein and Free State and Griqualand West and Kimberley, it was just so wet and heavy, and I wanted to play with the ball in hand. You have to kick the thing there. It doesn't fly as far. A lot of frustrations between me and the coach, Alan Lewis, back then, that brought a bit of doubt. But when I went back to Italy, obviously, in playing for Treviso, proud city, proud team, good tradition, I thought, well, I'll finish there. And so that made me brave enough to travel the world. It is difficult. I think people underestimate that. It's one thing going into another culture, it's moving house, it's asking your wife and children to pack up and introduce them to different cultures themselves, makes new friends, but you always know that you're not going to stay there forever. You are going to uproot yourself again some other time. And so therefore, you don't spend much money on making it too comfortable for yourselves because you know that you will go on to another place. So a lot of different challenges around living abroad, but something my whole family embraced, my wife especially. And I think without that support, obviously, I wouldn't have been, from a personal perspective, so brave to live abroad. But Then what I saw that did to my rugby philosophy, I knew I had to pursue something. I want to be different. I've coached Super Rugby before, and I've coached and played in Europe long enough for me to understand the difference. And I also thought that I would always like to. My philosophy is all about being different, progressing, changing the shape of the game, getting more and more innovative, make this enjoyable rugby experience for the players, but also a good product for the people to, to watch and to enjoy. So with that, I wanted to have the experience in both hemispheres. And I've coached a long time now. In the first, it was the Magnus League many years ago with Treviso, and then it became Pro 12, and then after a Rabo Direct stint, and then now in the URC, so Pro 14, and then the URC. With the European Cup competitions in between, we have the French Challenge and the English Challenge. Made it obviously an opportunity to expand my knowledge around the game, understanding. I know all the cities and towns where the game's played, what the distance from the hotel is, when the wind will blow and when it's not, what it feels like to play in wet. So all of those things were necessary for me to develop a complete rugby philosophy.
Yeah, this is enlightening because I'm a profiler, sort of interrogator by nature. So I was looking at your record and I said, well, maybe he just likes to be in a city near mountains where he can go hiking. And then I thought, no, maybe he wants to be Smith and Jones. He goes to Wales because everyone's called Jones, Elias Smith and Jones. And then I thought, no, Wayne Smith. So Smith got you over there. It was a Smith Confederacy. Now I realize it was more intentional about rugby and probably about your family. There's a staying as the third culture where kids are raised in different places. Has your family sort of adopted Italian roots? I mean, how deeply do you embed when you have your family abroad like this?
Yeah, look, I'll start. My son Franco Jr. was born in Wales in 2000, and then my second son John, he plays at the Sharks. He was born in Treviso here in Italy, and my daughter in Bloemfontein. And so we and then they lived most of the years here. My oldest son lived 7 years here. He went to school. All three children went to school here, but I think he was the one that he was first year at high school when we moved back to South Africa, and well, he's Italian first language, and it was an obvious
Wow.
choice to come back here. My whole family speaks Italian. That's a benefit. We're now marrying into an Italian family. It's a benefit. At least we can understand what everybody says, and the relation will be completely different from an Afrikaans Italian family. That the fact that we've embraced the culture, the fact that we can speak the language makes a big difference. And yeah, so my daughter lived with for a long time, for a year after COVID year in Treviso with me when I was the Italian head coach, or then the performance director more. They spent a year with me here, and then when I went to Glasgow, we decided to move her back to South Africa to finish schooling there. So we lived quite apart. So they know the sacrifice. We know in the last 5 years, I think we didn't live more than 3 months in the same house.
Hmm.
Not never at the one long enough at one time. So a lot of sacrifice made through the years. Which it's a big regret, but it also helped me to bring my children up in a different way. They understand the world's around, and they understand different cultures, and that helped them shape their lives as well. So no regrets regarding the fact that we've lived across the world.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to know what an Afrikaans Italian argument sounds like. And what that dynamics is in a family. But maybe I'll just let you have that one. And you also might have a tendency to live with one room full of boxes. Just don't unpack. Sorry, sweetie, we gotta wait. We don't know. But talk to me about, to me, the most honest places I've ever been in my life have been in the locker room, in the change room, the cloakroom, especially after a loss. Back in the day when we all showered together. It was cold still. There was no hiding. There was no excuses. It's not like other parts of life where you can fudge it away. But I imagine your cross-cultural life has helped you because now, coaching at Glasgow, guys are from everywhere. You have a guy from Argentina, you have a guy from South Africa. Your captain is Carl Steyn. You have all these different, and who knows? No one understands Glaswegian English. It's the hardest English to understand in the world, and there's an Aussie as well. So have you found that this has helped your coaching to be able to, I don't know the right word here, but you can straddle, you can bridge the gap?
Yeah, definitely. I would think so. My philosophy is that rugby is my vehicle to influence and change people's lives. And I was challenged now with different cultures, different backgrounds, obviously, the different upbringings, and but the rugby is our vehicle, and we all engage in that. And I think I've got a big thing around personality and character. Obviously, everybody's born with a certain personality in a certain country with a certain upbringing, but you build character, and character needs to override your personality to make sure that you're an acceptable person or you can contribute, or it's not about yourself, especially in a rugby environment and the team sport, environment. Rugby is special because the 15 players are so from a position specific point of view represents basically or the population of the world. There's fat people, tall people, short people. There's quick and slow people, and everybody fits into a rugby team. So it represents basically, from a personality perspective, everybody and shape and size. It simulates a population. So the character side of things helps us to become one, to understand what is the direction, what is the objective. Winning is not the only thing. We are here to give each other joy and play, and also opportunity, and that should last longer than the 80 minutes on the field, the season that you've spent with Glasgow. It must be something that makes you teary when you leave. It must something that you enjoy sitting in front of the fireplace one day when you're older and looking back. That must be a special period. Now, I coach from that last hour in my life or that opportunity back, not towards it. And I think
Mm.
that is where where the link comes in between the different cultures, is that we all in the end want the same thing. So it's easy to, rather than project towards it, turn it the other way around and plan from that minute back. What must that look like? And I think that is the way we play, the way we train, and the way everybody got to contribute. I'm a firm believer that people must give to get. That is the biblical approach, so you must first give to get. And once everybody's bought into it and they see what other people are prepared to sacrifice to get a result or to get what they want in life, then it's easy to hook on, and it becomes a general character of the team that develops, and not just individual personalities.
Rugby is curious as well. Maybe it's unique in the relationship between a coach and a captain. In many sports, the captaincy is largely symbolic now. It doesn't make any strategic decisions on the field. It doesn't change and shift. But because of the recycling nature of rugby and the fact that the ball keeps going, you have to have someone who can do that. You've got obviously Carl Steyn, and we have the Scottish national captain Sione Tuipulotu on your team, which is interesting because you have two guys that are not from Scotland that are, the leaders. I mean, obviously it's a leadership group, but you have some big talking guys on this team as well. Adam Hastings, the Fergusons, obviously there's some guys like Jack Dempsey that not afraid to speak their mind. How do you go about picking your captain, and how does that relationship work over a season or two?
No, look, to be honest with you, I didn't know Carl well enough when I got there. I've let myself, I've been led a little bit like around my assistant coaches and the club
Mhm.
manager, John Manson. So I did a little bit of homework. I preferably didn't want to have another South African as a captain. It was all about, I don't want this to be a South African rugby development program. So it was all about getting the right guy. And then spontaneously, everybody just said, there's just one guy, and that's him. So I had a
Mm.
difficult task. Obviously, it was easy to ask. to ask Kyle to be the captain. He was really, really excited about that and privileged. But I also had to let Ryan Wilson, who was a long-term captain there for 5 years now, his first week there, and I had to tell him that he's not going to be the captain, and that was going to bring an interesting dynamic into the group if it was not managed right. So the first thing I had to do was tell somebody that's been captain, club captain for 5 years, that he's not going to be involved. So not going to be involved as a captain and not even a leadership group. It's going to be a fresh start. It's going to be different. I want his experience. I want to, and then I made him. I changed my leadership group into obviously the leadership group that's what Carl and myself picked, and then obviously I had to do with the older guys that was there. So Ryan and Richie Gray became the elders, as we called them. And then there was a guy called Fraser Brown. They were, they were not part of the leadership group, but they were go-to people, and it made them feel part still. It made them and it gave them an important role and understand, and that worked well. That supported Kyle very well. Sione and even Rory Darch now that's captaining Scotland on this tour now, both of them developed in this leadership group that we've got. There's obviously opportunity to contribute, freedom of making the use of the opportunity to bring new ideas in and discuss them and be in a safe environment where the new ideas were welcome. So all of that obviously contributed to us establishing a strong leadership group, of which Carl's literally just the leader. You think sometimes the captain must speak the loudest, and I prefer the captain to be in the room. Everybody knows where he sits at the table, but he's not running the narrative in the room. So
Yeah.
if you walk into a dining room and he sits at the table, everybody must know where he is, but he shouldn't run the narrative. And he slotted perfect in there. And it also because of a lot of change that I brought there, he was the ideal guy to embrace and inspire and motivate people to find different ways. So that's progressed. We've got a very good relationship. So we can get together every day, just even if it's sometimes just so I'm going home now. So, but at least there's enough communication and open channels, and make sure that I hear their voice, but um, I anticipate a little bit more with his input every day.
I wanted to ask you, Franco, you mentioned the word communication and the fact that you communicate well. Do you find it a challenge being slightly older than the players and some of these new generation players? Harry and I have been talking about this quite a bit lately. Harry spoke to Marco Mazzotti the other day of the Sharks. Younger generation players need to be communicated with in a different way. Do you adjust your style? Do you see the need for that? And how important is effective communication with your players?
Yeah, no, I have had to adapt quite a bit. I ask a little bit more from the players in the training field to allow them to give more from themselves when we play. So to get that right, you gotta find a feedback channel, and you gotta have a receptive and understand receptive communication channels. So yeah, I had to adapt. I sometimes they are almost always on their phones and looking down, and I found a way to communicate using a similar distraction even in the gym, just to make sure that they when they have a break or they look down, there's some info or feedback. I stay close to them. I try and be involved with everything. If they in the medical room or in the gym or wherever it is, I'm always around with a little bit of encouragement and a short opportunity to talk instead of having them in official meetings. I don't think that we've moved away from come to my office situations. I think there's a time for that, but it's completely different. It's open communication. It's on the floor. Nobody's uncomfortable. You must give them that freedom of speech. Or speech. I'm not. It sounds wrong if I say freedom of speech. It's freedom of making use of the opportunity to speak. Just to allow them, feel that they've got shares in the company and they're not just people working there.
You know, it's
Well,
like a feeling of investment, isn't it? Really being involved. The young people that I manage, they want to know why we're doing things. We have to talk. We have to show pictures. So this information you're pushing to them on their phones, is that? Don't tell me obviously the IP, but is that tactical? Is that just encouragement? What type of messaging are you sending to them on their phones?
Yeah, it's all of that basically. Some of it's got a little strategy to it, it's good, it's motivational sometimes, and it's not. I don't need to motivate these boys; they are driven. But it's to encourage, and it's to sometimes I adapt the schedule. I sometimes change the schedule to a rapid schedule. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is rapid as quickly as possible, but it's actually rapid. We just shorten lunch and put their food in a wrap, and then they have a wrap each day. So that means that they'll go home earlier, a little bit earlier in the day, and they'll finish earlier. And without surprising them, that is not the objective, but it's we're flexible. It shows that they can adapt, they can do to go on to the next thing. And so the phones are not. It's not the primary. It is an add-on, like a phone should be. I don't want them to sit on their phones and think that all the information is coming from that. It's just something that we use to add value to the communication system. But at the same time, if they are spend so much time on their phone, they can just as well, pick some of our stuff on it. It's good to send some videos over it and a bit of review feedback. That way, I don't have to, I can save time in the official video sessions and review sessions. And it allows my coaches to access to the players. It allows opportunity to top up if if the concentration span is challenged with the time we spend as a group together, this is another opportunity just to feed in and feedback. And yeah, it's a good tool. But again, I see it as a tool, like a lot of things we need to do to coach or to work with the new generation.
I wanted to ask you this. You can have all the tools at your disposal. You might use them, and you and I and Harry basically grew up sort of the same time, more or less the same. And then nowadays was sort of my way or the highway. So if somebody, your headmaster or somebody told you to do something, you would accept it and go on. How do you encourage and how do you create the culture for these younger players to actually feel emboldened or free enough to actually approach you about something and talk to you about it, to bridge that chasm, basically, apart from the technology that you use, but also the culture of not being afraid to raise their voices, raise ideas and the likes?
Obviously, first of all, there should be direction. I'm directive, not prescriptive. So I think I can only get buy-in if they know where we're going. So, and you can only change something if you have something to change. So to establish your culture, to establish your way of play, your way of do, how a week looks, what the month looks like, the planning ahead, a year. I try and give them on the 1st of January the whole plan from January to January, so they can fit their off days and their time away from the game in there, and they have understand the whole picture. So yes, it's I think. From that perspective, you have to adapt, be adaptable. But I'm sure that once they get to know me, and a lot of individual man management and understanding and getting to know people, I did a study. You maybe Harry would maybe know more of that. I looked into a study that was done and followed since 1984 of player personality profiling of it was the NFL then, is it? And they discovered that there is actually 8 sport personalities in a team or in your squad, and I ended up learning that traits and understanding what makes every personality tick, and I can identify what player belongs to what character and to what group of personality. So I understand what works for them. I understand them better, and I try and see it from that perspective. So through that, that knowledge, I think I've built the relationships, or I built the relationships, which is understandable. And again, understandable from the player's perspective. They know what I want to understand more or less, their personalities, what their needs are, and the way they want to get the information from us. Some boys or some players don't like it at all to be corrected. You must find a different way to get them to do what they want with their buy-in. So again, if you don't understand the person, you don't understand the player, and you don't understand their minds or their beliefs or where they are going with their careers or as persons, people above everything. So good people makes good players. That is the main thing, and for me, that's important to understand their side of things, and therefore, once they know me, and I also have a personality or a sports personality, and once they get to know me and understand what I'm about, I think it's like speaking to my own sons, and I think that is another blessing that I have, is that I've got two sons that are both playing the game. They're all youngsters coming through it. I know what they want to hear, and I speak and understand that age's language well because of my own experience with it. So, a combination of things that helps to open that relationship. But I mean, it's like in any job, it is about getting to know the people and, share something of yourself before you're going to get something more from them.
What's your sports personality, Franco?
I'm
I
a
was about
knight.
to ask.
I'm a knight. It means that I care,
A knight
usually,
like K-N-I?
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
KNIGH. So I'm a knight, it's called. There's a Mavericks and there's Eagle Scouts. There's various different names for these
Mm.
player personalities. But yeah, I'm a knight, and most of my team, has the same trait. So the traits. So it helps a lot. It's an eye care environment. Um, Unfortunately, that also has its negatives because a knight usually doesn't don't want to disappoint. So they might end
Mm.
up wanting to try to not disappoint. So you must have a countermeasure for that. But I'm a knight and I care for everybody's outcome. I want the best for the people. So it's a good trait to have, but there's also challenges with that.
Okay, the one thing that I do notice now, I mean, you do a lot of thinking. It's not something that you just sort of scribbled on the backs of a cigarette box. I mean, all this research you've done and the way that you talk, this is something that you spent hours and hours thinking about and planning ahead and everything else. Are you sort of a student of life here?
Yeah, that I mean, like I said, you guys would know that I'm a Christian and I'm religious. So my main my main assistant is the Bible. So I take a lot of that for myself personally out of that, so that to make sure that I stay true to life, true to what life's really about. So I started by saying that this is my vehicle and it's my opportunity to work with young people's lives, and it's not about them playing rugby. It's about them being better fathers, making a difference in the world, being brave enough to not just accept, but to not only expect, but also accept and understand that they've got a bigger role in the community to play and for the rest of their lives. And I also think that so we do a lot of life skill sessions during the week. It is an opportunity for them to make sure that they influence the world around them, even away from the game. They become heroes for a reason, and people look up for them. That is an opportunity for them, and it gives them a way into people's hearts, and to even if it's just in the manner in which they treat people, and that helps. So again, yes, I do think a lot of this, but my mission is not to create better rugby players, but to influence people to become the best version of themselves.
You're a very thought-provoking guy, actually. My first time to talk to you. And so I find myself having three thoughts, and I'm trying to save two of them. I forgot one when I come back to them. And I want to get to some rugby shape patterns. But your team itself, I mean, I know some of these guys, either, I've met them or know about them. There's some rowdy guys in here, and there's some people that are very different from each other. And hilarious scene I saw of Sione Topoloto talking about Jack Dempsey, giving him some chirp saying, I'm an alpha male, I'm an alpha male. And then he said to Sione, you're an alpha male, but in a beta body. And it made Sione laugh so much. So you got to have that chirp and banter inside a locker room is the one thing I was thinking about. And maybe most importantly in this generation we're talking about, my kids and people I manage a lot of times are in that they like to be taken individually, seen It's not just like a group. All the forwards go here or the backs go there. They want to have a curated plan. So how much do you? So because I look at some of these players, Stafford McDowell, Hugh Jones, Tupeloto himself, Scott Cummings, Jack Dempsey. They've gotten better under you. They've definitely, as players, become. Some of them become lions. Some of them have stepped up. Um, how much attention do you pay to each player, or is it more in groups like it used to be?
No, it's individual sport played collectively. That's the way I see it. So, yeah, no, I'm trying to make hybrid players.
Mm.
Stafford McHale, for example, now has played at the loose forward for us specifically. For a lot of reasons. One, for the backs to understand how much knowledge the forwards must have every week. So he became disciples from the forwards perspective. So. No, the competition. I'm not afraid to pick the right player for the right game. There's certain ingredients in my team selection, and so I know, that they know that they will be rested at the right time, but they will be challenged at the right time. And I think, especially from a training perspective, we train different. My philosophy is different than the rest of the world's approach on how to do it. There's no scientific right or wrong here, but it works for our team. It allows us to have a rugby program where everybody develops growth, get rested, because the main ingredients are enthusiasm, creativity, and energy. And you get all of that from individual management. If you put them all in groups, you end up getting fat people getting fatter, and you get slow people getting slower, or you get quick people. So you
Yeah.
don't address the specific needs of every player. So it takes more work. We are less coaches. We're only three coaches. We will next year. We will add Rory Grant as well now, but we're only three coaches. But the S&C guys, everybody contributes in some way for us to allow us to be hands on, and that every individual gets addressed and gets the opportunity to improve his skill set or his physical conditioning.
I've had two chats recently with coaches. One with Stuart Lancaster, one with Michael Check, and they both said the same thing, that the coach himself must refresh himself. To go to the Bible, be still and know that I am God, to be out in nature, to look around, do something different. There's a tendency of some guys to burn the midnight oil. Oh, I stayed up till 2 o'clock watching film. At some point, it's, diminishing returns. What do you do to make sure you're healthy, that you're okay, you're balanced, and, one loss is not going to send you in a tailspin?
Again, my faith keeps me on track. I think I would have, having changed environment so often, and big changes, flying across, living in different countries, and always being South African. I think English is my third language. Everybody could have noticed that by now. So it is different. It is different. So I find my joy in what I do. That is my purpose, and I've got some tricks up my sleeve to refresh myself, to make sure that I know how to unplug. Like I said, it was different now, seeing that my wife and I lived with myself now for most of the last 3 years. It is challenging because you don't switch off. You get back home on a Friday after the game or end of training, and you literally wait for Monday to happen. So I worked in Glasgow. I never lived there, if I can put it that way. And it's not that I didn't like it. I was just, to go to a restaurant and ask for a table for one is not great. So to order a beer for one guy standing in the corner is not great. So it was challenging, but it also allowed me, and I did enough research, and I got enough stimulation to refresh myself. But I'm also, purpose driven. I think I find my rest sometimes in working. Working is a joy for me. Uh, it's not a struggle. It hasn't been, for now. I hate the pressure. So there's only one thing that I don't really like, and that's disappointment. I can handle a loss easy. Losses make you better. If you don't lose, you'll never improve. So, got a saying there: we don't have to lose to keep learning. So it's important for me to keep learning. But if we're not going to lose games, we're not improve, and that's a massive opportunity to get better and to emotionally and mentally get back on your sharp edge. So that's necessary. But the one thing that I do struggle with, to be honest, is disappointment. So don't like to be disappointed. I take that personally, and that is the hardest thing I have to work through week after week. So yeah, I have my ways, but I think the main ingredient is the faith that I've got at the moment, and that I'm busy with a bigger purpose than just coaching rugby.
From the time you were a light running around in hard fields up till now, you're a coach, in some rainy old cathedral towns. The game has changed, The obviously the drag back held up, drop out, the 50-22 spacing in the backfield, the rock itself, and then the clear access, no escort, no shepherd, no guard. Rugby keeps shifting. Looking back, from sort of when you started, when you were playing for the Boks until now, what are the big changes you see in rugby? Is it more aerial? Is it more finding space is different? And where do you see it going next, I suppose?
Oh, look, the organizational part was, I think, something I started playing in a structure at the back end of my career. I think when in 2002, Heineke Meyer a little bit started it with the Bulls. My last season there, it was different because obviously back then we were all around the 10 and the 12. They drove the game. Identified space, played to it, but the the improvement of the defense in the 99 from the 99 World Cup till the 2003 World Cup made a big change in the world rugby. I think Eddie Jones got it right in the fact that he with the Brumbies already started with a big structural driven. I was at the receiving end of a 70-point drubbing in Brisbane. I was sorry, not in Brisbane, in Canberra
Canberra,
against the
yeah.
Brumbies, and yeah, so they outplayed us on that evening. And it wasn't that we didn't have a good team. We had 12 Springboks on that team, but they were so well organized. The right people were touching the ball in the right areas. They had loose forwards hanging on the edge, like we've seen now. They were really not overcommitting to breakdowns. They had more people on their feet, but because we were still migrating to the breakdowns, and then I think everybody started adapting the structured game, and it was basically forced due to good defense processes that was in place. So to bridge the good defense, since obviously then along came all the video angles that we've got now. You've got 8, you can go up to 12 video angles of the game, and there's no place to hide. So with that information, you now have to be clever around creating space and manipulating and getting the defense. So personally, I like to think that to create space is obviously about manipulating the defense, and I know everybody talks about that, but it's to find ways to breach or to get an unwanted action from the defense, and that I feel is the one major change. A lot of structure, a lot of different attack shapes now that you get. It's off 10, it's off 9, it's flat, it's a little bit deeper, it's out the back, and the defense systems challenge you every week to get that up. The defense systems now are adaptable. They have got high edges, soft edges. They have the pendulum system at the back or not. There's a lot of ways to, that of different things that happens every week, and if you don't stay on top of that every week, you fall behind quickly. You fall behind because the game changes every week and after every weekend. So that I think is the main change for me from the time that I played. We had the scrum that just stumbled in. There wasn't the real pause. Age was not even, it was before that. No line out lifts until a certain point in my career. Well, but the back end we had
Yeah, we
that.
always lifted though.
Yeah, so you always lifted, but you weren't. But in the end, that was big obvious changes. But I think the main change now for me since I've played is that everybody in the team's a fly off now. You need rugby players, not forwards and backs. You need people that understand the shape of attack and be adaptable to that. And I think through the video analysis and uh, through the systems that's now been created, it's much easier to much different from what I was used to. It was much easier back in the day, just telling people to come around the corner and they did it. Now it's about who comes around the corner and when. So yeah, I think the organization, the professionalism, although rugby for me became too late a, a professional sport. Rugby only in 95 actually became professional. I think we've made some big steps. I mean, there's a lot more to make from a professional point of view. But I think it's already a different sport from when we played it in 1999 or 2000 in the World Cup.
Yeah, when you have props doing pullbacks, when you have pods at Splinter, when you have a guy like Ty Furlong who can sometimes have better hands than a 12, and you can have 12s that are better over the ball than a flank. It's up for grabs. I took a look at the Glasgow shape over the season, and not fixating on one game or the other, just the shape as a whole, and finding space. You were not a play-through team, but I wondered if that was because of injury. You were more evasion, fourth in the league, but not using offloads incessantly. And not a tight team, but also not super wide. You were kind of the middle, a lot of passes, fourth in the league, and good at getting to the second receiver. You have some real playmakers in that back line. Is that something that sort of just finds its way organically in a season, or when you start and you storyboard the season, do you actually play to those KPIs?
Yeah, look, we were challenged this year with injuries. I've had a 32% injury rate, which is extraordinarily high. None of them were soft tissue injuries, so it's nothing that we did. It's unfortunately errors. Every team that played us this season played their final. Coaches survive another season if they get the champion, if they beat the champions of the previous year. So we've played test matches, and the reason I'm proud of the season was it's arguably our best season because we were through injury forced to be innovative in different ways. We had the best maul in 23, what's it, 22, 23, 23, 24. In the competition, we scored a lot of tries there. I think we scored
You were
24
middle
tries there, which
this
was
season, maybe. Yeah.
so, but that obviously teams adapted to that. So they stopped us from scoring with mauls. So they obviously studied what did Glasgow do to win the competition the year before. So we're going to stop them there. So we were defended much better in that regard. We had injuries with Richie Gray leaving at the beginning of the season. JP Dupree was injured still. Scott Cummings broke his hand again in the Harlequins game. We ended up Max Williamson broke his thumb. That's 4 locks. We started playing the flanks at lock. We called them flocks. So we had Ewan Ferry and Gregor Brown in the end playing lock. Gregor Brown ended up being is now playing for Scotland in the Six Nations at lock, and is now on tour as a lock. So we we, we were really challenged. So what the challenge wasn't. So that meant obviously that you had to find different ways to breach the advantage line, different people in different roles. The flip side happened. I played 4 games this year with 4 hookers on the pitch. So we were we were being forced to use the flanks as locks. We ran out of loose forwards at one stage. So for a big part of the season, we played with 4 hookers. 2 as hookers and 2 as loose forwards. The benefit of that was is we had always somebody to throw the ball in, even if we had a yellow card, there were always somebody to throw the ball in. But the big thing, so we were challenged from that perspective. Again, with Sione being out for a long part, an important part of the season, Hugh Jones being not available for a long part, it forced us to play Tom Jordan and Stafford for too many games consecutively. So there was a little bit of management during the week that only allowed us to get a certain amount of work or change done during the week. So if I can say this is that hunting to become the champions is completely different. Once you are the champions, your whole environment, your whole approach changes, and it's not you are challenged every week to play a test match, and to be mental tough, you must have the physical ability and a plan, and a plan that can make you, the players can believe can make us win. So that was the strategy. So then we found different ways. We wanted to be able to score 4 tries. I think for most of the game, I think um, once we qualified for the home quarters, and that was against Zebre, and I think there was still 4 rounds left. The motivation shifted. It was a completely different approach. We had to, manage players, make sure that we have a competitive group playing in the playoffs, and I think the Leinster game in the quarterfinals challenged us from an emotional intelligence perspective and from a mental perspective quite a lot to recover from that. So to come back to the shape of the game, the reason I'm putting that background in there is you must understand the players that's out there. Some of them played out of position, out of roles that they're not used to. We only have so much time to adapt. So we all already, having finished last year so late in the competition and then started so early, our with the summer tour in place, with 24 internationals away, your preseason prep looks always also a little bit different. So
Yeah.
we played our first game against Ulster was the first game for everybody in the senior squad that we did not play a warm-up game just because they wouldn't have had the proper break before. So it's going to be the same for us this season, with everybody being away the lines. And so that challenges you if you want to change your shape on attack, or if you want to change your shape on defense, or if you want to if you have people out of roles. So again, we had to find different ways, and I'm proud of Nigel on attack. He's been excellent around that to help us and to understand why I see things in a certain way and why we can't pick the traditional way, why we can't play the traditional way, and to instill that information in that players was always going to be very important.
Frankie, just one thing you mentioned earlier on, that one of your biggest problem, basically, I don't know if problem is the right word, was disappointment, dealing with disappointment, and being the champions last year, and then not ending the this league this year as the way you wanted to because of the injuries and everything else you just explained. That must have been a disappointment. How did you handle that? I mean, that must have been quite a bit of a challenge.
No, I wasn't disappointed with that result. I think we lost against the best team in the competition in the semi-final. We should just not have played them in the semi-finals. We should have been better. We were on our way to be. We were second for 16 rounds in the competition, and unfortunately lost against the Bulls at home, which was came from one bad decision from our side. A lot of things could have happened. We lost with 1 point against Ulster the very first game, and we lost against Ospreys in the 84th minute when we had the ball. We just had to run over the touchline. So if you add suddenly 6 points there, we would have been cleared of the Bulls. We would have been cleared from the Sharks. We would have ended second, and we probably would have played Leinster in the final. So for the first time, we qualified to play a home European Cup game in the round of 16. We've played for the first time in this history in the quarterfinal of the European Cup. So there was very good things from that perspective. So the disappointment for me this season was that our own expectation became so high that we felt losing against the best team in the competition in the final was a disappointment, and everybody felt like that. Yes, it makes you appreciate last year's win so much more. It's really, really tough. The fact that it's the fourth different champion explains how hard it is. In the moment last year, I just felt like another competition done. But I know now this year what it took to get to win that thing, and the same, in the same breath, I must say we did excellent to not succumb with all the international games in between, not to succumb to the pressure and of expectation. And so I should not be disappointed. I was disappointed with the some results that didn't go away, but never in the effort, never in what we've done, never in what the club stands for, never in the and our ability to kick on from here. There's no disappointment. I think this is arguably the best season for me there, even if we didn't win the competition. Our mentality and our resilience from a physical perspective was excellent. To be hunted every week and still stay on top of it, is a compliment to the resilience of the boys. So shouldn't be disappointed. I'm disappointed with the result, but not disappointed with the season.
I was looking at in preparation for this. I was just thinking about Glasgow and what did I like? What did I like about the season, Franco? And I love the fact that you were a kick return try scoring team using kick return, and also high on set piece percentage. And I thought, well, what? That's a strange combination: the set piece try scoring team and a kick return. And then I thought maybe you think of kick return as a set piece. Do you organize kick return like the Kiwis did back in the day? Is that something that you actually, train for the chaos during practices?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's something I brought to South Africa, and when I went to coach the Cheetahs in 2015, obviously it was easier in Europe, because they kicked the ball much more in Europe. So I could learn during my period with Benetton, how we get the run to zones, how do we get people to run back to the right areas of the pitch, who goes to the breakdown, whatever it is, anticipate where they kick from. So yeah, the teams that I've coached, the Cheetahs, especially in South Africa, would always remember for their back three. It was always Reino Smith or Clayton Blommetjies or Raymond Rule back in the day, and Sergio Peterson. It was all people that we've used to bring the ball back and punch some holes in and then be organized from it. So because we are so good from set piece, people not or the teams don't give us line out anymore. So to get any attack platform on the other side of the halfway line, we had to be innovative. And if they were not going
Yeah.
to kick it off, they had to pay for it in that way as well. So if the one side of their approach works or doesn't work in the sense that they prefer not to face us from a set piece, a defensive perspective, and they give us the ball, they must pay for that. If they say, look, like don't give them the ball, they counter attack so well, and they start giving you set piece, that is actually what we want. So I'm not, I don't mind anybody listening to this with just understand, but it takes a lot of work. It's not as easy as a set piece starter. It takes understanding, and if you change the personnel, you must remember to change the approach. So yeah, I noticed clearly that teams doesn't want to give us lineouts anymore, especially from our driving ability in the year before, and so we had to work hard on another plan as well.
Obviously, we can jump now to sort of the test season and look at what's coming up here. And from the outside, just commenting on stuff. I don't know if you watched the Argentina victory over the Lions, but they didn't have much of the ball. But geez, they used the scraps well. And Bernard Jackman said that in practice, when he watches Argentina practice, they spend the first 25 minutes of every practice feeding off the scraps. What do you do with the scraps? Balls in the middle, and that's the drill. It's just on the ground, go. Um, it's interesting because some teams literally kind of kill the advantage. They immediately go to some cross kick, hope and prayer, and then they come back to the set piece because that's what they prefer. Um, does it look like to you that Springboks now with Tony Brown, obviously Felix Jones, those guys are looking to play more with the scraps from the chaos general play?
Look, we'll have to see that now. So Rassi was saying, obviously they need to progress and continue to, grow the brand. I thought they were more brave and more free in the last two seasons. Last season specifically, a little bit freer with the ball in hand. The origin of that position must actually be determined. I'm not sure if it was just from long kicks back, or was it really off scraps, or was it really off crumbs that fall on the floor. They turnover attack? What was the specific approach there? But to compare that quickly with what you said around Argentina, remember that's Argentina's DNA. They grow up playing in the way that way. South
Hmm.
Africans not also grow up playing with that mindset of, getting it into the space, move it away, get it away, make the defense think and or adapt. It's usually the safe way. Just carry it up, slow down, kick from it, or I think it needs to be part of your team's DNA, turnover possession, and how you work and deal with it, and what is your approach of it. So again, Test match rugby is not necessarily there for the liberal approach that Argentina has, but because Argentina has been playing like, and the same with the French, been playing like that for their whole since they started playing the game, they always had this flair and all this opportunistic approach. So it's so much part of how the players grew up that I think it's going to be more acceptable, more adaptable, maybe from their perspective. But I don't know. I'm not sure if it's necessary for South Africa to go completely into that mode.
Mm.
If they score, if South Africa have other ways to score or other ways to win the games, the question would rather be: is it necessary to go in that direction? It can surely add another arrow to their quiver, but do they spend enough time together? Is it their DNA? And is it necessary to go away from what they can really do well? That already do so well. So that is something that from a tactical, strategical perspective, Russia will have to look at. Will we see them play more with the ball in hand from set piece and from structured organization? Definitely. We've seen that at the end of last season. So surely they're going to play a little bit more rugby in comparison with the first World Cup and during the World Cup.
Mm.
It's definitely going to be more liberal than we've already seen.
To use your analogy about the hunter and the hunted, obviously the Bucks are the hunted. They get everyone's best performance. If someone beats the Bucks, all the fans storm the field. It's famous, it's historic, and you have the All Blacks, who've always been the best team at reacting to losses, sitting on a 4-game losing streak and hosting us at the Fortress in Eden Park. Sounds like a challenging year, no? I mean, how do you keep refreshing? How do you keep changing yourself so you're not easy to work out?
Look, there's some ingredients in the South African team that's different. The players that play in Japan, they get managed well, so they're reasonably fresh coming into this competition. You have some young, and so Rassie got that right. Some new guys that is introduced. Even if the group's 54, 58, those players in that group training brings new energy, new enthusiasm to the group, and it will lift training quality. It will lift the competition in the group. So I definitely think that ingredient will help. I think also that players are starting to look at the World Cup in 2027. Are they going to be a part of it? I think that ingredient will add to the enthusiasm. And then you've got this Sasha Feinberg Manguzulu. He brings a little bit more flair and excitement. He's a little bit more liberal with the ball. Will that not ignite everybody around them to be more on top of their game? Maybe goes a little bit against what I just said, but he is a little bit liberal with the ball. Having coached, prepped against him the other day. He'll ask questions. I mean, the team that he speak for this weekend, to have Van der Berg at scrum half is also an exciting player with the ball in hand. They look for opportunities. Same with Fassi at the back. They little grabbers through. There's different ways they found to score. So all those things are ingredients that will lift the emotion. It will obviously lift the energy in the group and the enthusiasm, and it ignites creativity. So if you have those ingredients in the preparation for these important matches, it allows you to manage the test match squad and the preparation for that specific challenge different. You can rather tone that energy down than suddenly look for it to add it to your environment. So I think he's been smart in the sense that he's added new players that will challenge people to keep their places, but at the same time, the new generation will be focused on contributing and making use of the opportunity, and that will create competition and also an emotional bring a an important emotional part to the Springbok setup as it is now.
Frankie, you talked about innovation. One of the most innovative things I've seen is Dawn's Farm. What was your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, no, Don's uh, so Don started with me. He wasn't coaching when I was with the Cheetahs. I went to asked him to come and do the front row for me because I coached the pack of forwards as I do with Glasgow, but I couldn't tell a guy exactly where he must put his head in the front row because I didn't play there. It's the one area I could do everything else. It's the shape, the height, I coach everything in the scrum, but I do not want to argue. I'm at the point where I can argue with somebody now about what's happening there in the front, but I haven't played this. I wasn't sure. So that's the way I got him involved, and he's run with the opportunity, and he's done a great job of getting better. So yes, I think if you have a coach like that, focusing just on that part of the game with that enthusiasm, with that eagerness, and being innovative, getting the boys to come and spend some time with him. I don't think it was about working on his farm; it's about getting to know him, understanding his passion for scrummaging, and to make sure that when he taps into that extra little bit of extra resilience and power in a game, may that be from the side or in a halftime chat, that they know where he comes from. And I think that was quite clever.
And the fact that it's in the Free State, cold and winter, and it's far away from everybody. It's 4 hours drive apparently, and it's quite challenging. Does that do anything for the mental side of it? And we also saw the little Dachshund barking there, and somebody said that's like a scrum half. That's it's teaching him to get used to the scrum halves over there. Does that play a role, do you think?
Yeah, I don't think how much training went on there on Don's farm, to be honest. I think it was more about, getting to know each other again, like I said before, doing him well. Yes, the cold, I think he would have used the cold to get them to maybe hunt something or to shoot something there or to maybe have a proper fire and sit around that. Yes, would they have done something to merit the opportunity? Yes, I'm sure. But I think it was, like I said, it was more a heart and mind approach than it is really a physical approach there.
You also had a heart and mind approach when you started at Glasgow the season before. You said, even before the season started, I remember you said, listen, guys, we have to go play at Loftus at altitude. And you made a plan for it right before. And you had a whiskey, you're going to have it, you're going to have to taste whiskey so you know what victory tastes like and that. You like this kind of thing yourself.
Yeah, look, that is, we're all human. We identify with victories in certain and different ways, and to get some of a specific approach was the whiskey factor. But yes, I like to, we do something different. I like to do things different. I like to do something different in a week. I like to do something in a month, something in the year. It is an important ingredient, but and I think it's it keeps make sure that there's not a distance between the coaching group and the players. It makes sure that we all remember that our objective is the same, and we have different ways to get to that. And to be, rugby should not be the only thing. It is obviously the main motive, but it's there's a lot of personal and individual ingredients that needs to be aligned, and you have to find ways to get that, to make best use of that.
Yeah, when someone asked me recently, what's the biggest change that you see, Harry, in the recent times? And I said was that the bench is now perceived to be an honor in some teams. That it's not as we all went to school and we walked into the hallway to see whether the team was posted and where we were, and it was death if you weren't the starting guy. And now there's people who, I don't know what they would prefer, but there's some people who literally like being the bomb squad, and they identify with it, and they want to come on, and they want to be the one. More, they want to be the one at the end on the field at minute 80. That strikes me as something that not just Rassie developed, but it's something that he's perfected almost in the sense of this branding. Um, when you are picking a team, do you sort of think of who's on the field at the end? Is that part of how you do it, or you start? Is it kind of here's the starters and then here's the reinforcements?
No, it's absolutely the first ingredient. I always challenge the boys and say to them, well, do you want to sing the anthem or do you want to hold the cup at the back end of the tournament? What do you,
There you go.
where do you see yourself? I think another way of putting it is, in South Africa specifically, the guys get to watch all the games together. They invite friends over and they stand for the anthem, and just after the anthem was sung, they would ask, "Can I get you something to drink?" Or they go and light the fire at halftime, but that doesn't happen in the last 20 minutes of the game. Why not? And that is the question I always ask them. They don't do that because that's the most important part of the game. But if you then have your second team on the pitch in a traditional way, what do you expect? Do you hope people will play well, or do you find a way and a plan to be competitive in that last part?
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, Franco, I don't know how long we're gonna keep you. We could probably talk for 2 hours, MBA, but yeah, I'll let you have the closing word, MBA.
Okay, Franco, just in closing, the elephant in the room is what's happening at Loftus. And we're not going to ask you about that. And we talked about this briefly. Just explain to us why we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah, no, look, I prefer not. First of all, I don't envy Jake. I think that's something that all coaches dread, is to be in a position like that. So it's a difficult time for him, and I don't want to now say too much about that. Nothing is this has been decided yet. I think the meeting is only going to be in 10 days' time. I think so. I know that what the intent is behind it, but I mean, you can understand that it's a difficult period for everybody at Loftus and for Jake specifically. So for now, it would be disrespectful for me to comment more than that. And yes, we hope that gets resolved as quickly as possible.
Right, Harry, any words in closing, any words of praise that you want to utter?
Franco, it's one of the best rugby chats we've had, because you were generous with your time, but also open about it. And I think it's fascinating, and I think it's one more reason why we definitely are in the best sport in the world. It is the complexity of the code, the international nature of it, and guys like you, basically rugby sailors sailing around the world. It's brilliant, and thanks very much.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Harry. Enjoyed the time with you.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.